What's up guys, and welcome back to SP Vids. In this video I'm going to be talking about the SP404sx. In particular, I'm going to be talking about my favourite effects on this unit. Now, favourite in the sense that they're the most useful, and favourite in the sense that I use them the most, and also favourite in the sense because I just find them my favourite. So I'm going to be talking through those with you. I'm going to be sharing some tips, and I'm going to be showing you some examples of how I use them on samples and drums. So I hope this is useful to you all. I hope this is useful to new users, and hopefully there's some information in here for more experienced users that will also be useful as well. So let's get the camera set up, let's get the SP set up on the desk, and I can start going through these effects. Okay, so the first effect that I'm going to mention, the first MFX, is the Isolator, which is located in the top right of the machine here. Now, as you progress as a beatmaker, this becomes a more and more integral effect, and the reason it's one of my favourite MFX is because it just allows you to get certain sounds to sit in the frequency range in the right points, and that's basically essential for making a full sounding beat. So I've talked about this before in videos. Your snares, your kicks, your hi-hats and your sample, they should all be working together to fill up that frequency range to make a full sounding beat. The Isolator is going to help you isolate certain frequencies. It's going to help you cut out certain frequencies that you don't want. It'll stop the muddiness in your mix, and yeah, it's just all around a brilliant tool, and it's so useful for beat making. So one example here, I've got some snares on these pads. They're already pretty crispy anyway, but if I apply the Isolator and we'll take out those lows, you can hear the difference between having a bit of a boost in the lows right there like that, and then if we reduce that right down, you get kind of more of a snap, and that's going to take up less space in the frequency range. It's going to stop that muddiness, and it's going to help that snare to crack right through the mix. So that's one example on the drum side of things. Now let's look for a sample on here. Okay, so here we have a sample, and one common thing that you'll want to do with a sample is reduce the bass as well, so that you can use your own bass underneath it. Now a lot of jazz samples will have that double bass underneath, and it's quite heavy and strong. It can really ruin the mix of your beat. It can make things sound very muddy in the low end, just because of the recording techniques and the softness of the way they're recorded. So again, the Isolator can come in useful. And you can hear there, you really can sculpt those samples and make a really big difference. So that's why the Isolator is definitely one of my favourite effects on the SP404sx, and actually on any of the SP range. There's pretty much an Isolator on every single one, apart from maybe the 202. So it's super fun to use it, and it's super useful as well for getting an all-round good mix. Right, now as we're over here, I'm going to move swiftly on to the next one, which is directly underneath it. It's the DJFX Looper. Now this is more of a live performance effect, but one of the reasons why I love this so much is just the amazing sound you can get out of it while you're performing a beat and playing live. I think it's one of the effects that's kind of made the later SPs really famous. I think this effect is something that stood out to me when I first got it and heard people making that skipping noise on a beat. It became so kind of characteristic of the SX. And yeah, you can do a lot of stuff with this once you get good with it. I think I've got a beat lined up here. So hopefully you could hear there that there's quite a lot of funky sounds that you can make with that effect, and I just think it's so legendary. It's such a legendary MFX on this unit in particular. Definitely one of my favourites. You can also use this to re-pitch things, and I know that sounds crazy. I've actually done a video about this before. I think it was called 2 Easy Ways to Re-Pitch Samples on the SP404sx, and it does give you a kind of nice sort of vibe. So let's see if we can find those chops again. Okay, here we go. So if we set the DJFX Looper on that pad, and we have the right hand dial off, you can experiment around with the length dial to make this as sweet as possible. And then if you use the middle dial, There you go, it's adding a really, really nice texture and vibe to that chop that I've got in there. So experiment around with that as well. It's good for repitching, and it's crazy for those sort of live performances and doing those skips and jumps and all those kind of things as well. So definitely one of my favorites, and one which I use very regularly when I'm performing beats. The next effect which I'm going to talk about is kind of something that takes you back to the early days of sampling, and that's the reason why I love this sound so much. So it's MFX 14, it's Bit Crash. I think I always call this Bit Crunch or Bit Crush, but it's actually Bit Crash. So I'm going to hold down both MFX and DJFX Looper and press 2, and there we go, I've got 14. And if used correctly, this can really make your SP sound like some of the vintage samplers like the SP1200, even the SP202. That's kind of known as a poor man's SP1200. So you can get that proper early lo-fi sampling noise where the technology was still pretty primitive and we weren't getting the quality that we can get nowadays. So this effect is really going to help you get back to that era and be able to recreate that kind of characteristic early lo-fi sound. So I think you've got rate, you've got bit crush or crash, and then you've got filter on the right. I tend to not really use the filter. I used to use filters all the time for my lo-fi beats, but then just realized they really muddy up your mix. So I tend to shy away from them a little bit more these days. So I keep that relatively high. And you can play around with the rate and the bit, or whatever those 3 letters stand for. I'm sure someone will correct me in the comments. And you just get that really delicate but nice sort of noise on your samples. I really think that is one of the best effects on the unit. I really love the sound that it puts on samples. Of course, you can use this on your drums as well. You can get some really, really crunchy drum sounds that will sound really old school and lo-fi in your beats as well. So play around with that effect. I think it's one of the best, and you can get some amazing textures out of that MFX. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about is one which we probably all know and has actually been used to death, but it's still one of my favourites, and it's MFX 16, it's Vinyl Sim. The Vinyl Sim on the SX I think is one of my favourite effects. I'll pretty much use this on every single sample that comes into the box, so I'm going to do the same trick, MFX and DJFX Looper in 4. So you've got a nice noise gen in the middle. To be honest, I tend not to use that. I've done videos about why I prefer to make noise separate and put it on its own pad instead of putting it on the actual sample. So I tend to take off noise, but the range that you get here, I mean, you can just do so much to a sample with this. You can really, really destroy it. You can hear there. We can bring that right up. And the flutter as well. Obviously, we all love a bit of flutter. If you're in lo-fi and you don't like flutter, then you're in the wrong genre, because that just sounds amazing when you stick that flutter on full. I just can't seem to find a plugin that does such a good job of flutter compared to that. It always just seems a bit over the top or a bit too wavy. I just think that puts the perfect amount of flutter on it when this is on full. It's just subtle and nice. I really, really enjoy that. And a little bonus behind the scenes trick as well is I've started using this a lot on my drums. So if we go back to A, I think all of these are pretty much sampled in with MFX 16 on them. And you just get this really, really crunchy drum sound, and that's with using the range dial a lot to kind of just reduce the sort of fidelity of the sample, I guess, yeah. So it's just making it that bit more lo-fi and taking out some of the frequencies and making it sound a little bit more muted and dull. But yeah, try that on your drums. I use that on all my drums these days. I absolutely love the effect that it puts on drums. So yeah, give that a try as well and see how you find that one. Okay, so I'll quickly mention one more, and it's compression. Now, I want to talk about this a little bit because when I started making beats on the SX, I found out about compression and I just started putting on absolutely everything. And when I go back and listen to my early beats now, the first thing I think is, wow, they're massively compressed and over compressed, to be honest. So it is an effect that you have to be careful with. I think you need to use it respectfully, don't just whack compression on your mix and hope everything's going to sound nice and together. Make sure you get your levels right on the samples first. That's a massive thing about the compressor. One example is if you're using drums against a sample and you've got compression on everything, try bringing the level of the sample down a little bit, just so those drums can knock through. That'll really create that pumping feel. And another tip as well with this one is that if you turn on the effects limiter, which is basically something for live performance so that you don't kind of kill the speakers in a venue, that's a rough description of what it does. Function 8, if you turn that on and press record, this now becomes release. It actually changes the function of the compressor. So if you want to mess around with that parameter, then that's the way to do it. So then you get sustain and release instead of attack. So you can change the length of the release and make it last longer or make it last shorter or whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do to your tastes, this is going to help get some more different sounds out of the compressor by being able to use release instead of attack. So yeah, to say that again, you just use function 8, the effects limit, and you just make sure it's on. I'm going to turn it off again because obviously I'm not performing live anytime recently. And then it gives you access to release. So it is a great compressor. It can add some really fat sound to your beat, but I think just use it really carefully. I think if you're making heavier sounding hip hop beats and fuller sounding hip hop beats like soul based samples, the compressor really comes into its own. For lo-fi and sort of thinner sounding beats, just be careful with how much you put on because it can ruin your beat. Just try and pull everything together a little bit. Don't try and completely change the whole sound of the beat with compression. So yeah, just use it wisely. There are others on here which I use a lot as well. I think delay for live performance deserves an honourable mention. And also one that I have been really enjoying recently is MFX 17, which is radio tuning. So I want to do an honourable mention for that one as well. Have a play around with that. That's similar to Bit Crash. And yeah, you can get some really nice vibes with that as well. So check that one out as well. Thank you very much for tuning in and watching this video. I hope you found it interesting to learn about the effects that I use on the regular. I'd love to hear your top 5 effects on the SP404sx, so if you want to leave a comment below and let me know, I'd really be interested to see which effects you guys are using. If you like this content and you want me to keep making these videos, then please head to spvids.com and pick up a drum pack. They support my channel massively and it keeps it funded and keeps me doing what I do, so use the link in the description below, and as soon as you purchase those you can download them instantly and start using them. So I'd really appreciate it if you could go and look at those. If you're new around here as well, don't forget to smash that subscribe button. I tend to upload 2 to 3 times a week at the moment, so there's always fresh lo-fi and SP and sampler tips coming out. So if that's the sort of thing you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button so you can get notifications. Huge shout out to my members for supporting me every month. Keep making beats, guys, and I'll be back with more content very, very soon. Peace!